The night my husband brought another woman home, I did not scream. I simply looked at the three of us standing beneath the chandelier in our living room and realized something terrifying. I had seen this scene before, not in a dream, not in a nightmare. In my previous life, the woman beside him was wearing the pearl earrings I had given him money to buy for my birthday. My husband, Adrian, avoided my eyes. "Lena," he said quietly, "please don't make this ugly." I almost laughed. Ugly? He had brought his mistress into the home where we had promised to grow old together, and somehow my reaction was the problem. The woman lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Her name was Clara. I remembered her. I remembered everything. In my previous life, I had trusted Adrian when he told me she was only his business partner. I had swallowed every suspicion, every unexplained late night, every secret phone call. I had defended him when my mother warned me. I had borrowed money for his company. I had sold my grandmother's house when he told me one bad year would ruin everything. And I had stayed when he cheated, stayed when he lied, stayed when he used my name to guarantee his debts, stayed until there was nothing left of me. The final memory was the clearest. A hospital room, rain against the windows, my hands trembling as I signed papers transferring the last of my savings to Adrian's company. He had stood beside the bed and promised, "Once this crisis is over, we'll start again." But he never came back. 3 days later, I learned that he had taken Clara overseas. The company was gone. My money was gone. Our house was gone. And so was the future I had spent 10 years protecting. I died at 34 with a broken heart and a debt collector standing outside my hospital room. Then I opened my eyes. I was 27, married to Adrian for 11 months. And Clara was standing in my living room 7 years earlier than she had in my memories. That was when I understood. This was not a dream. I had been given another chance. Adrian stepped closer. "Lena, say something." I looked at him. His face was exactly the same as I remembered. The man I had loved. The man I had once believed would protect me from the entire world. The man who had eventually become the person I needed protection from. "What exactly do you want me to say?" I asked. He frowned. "I want you to understand." "I understand perfectly." Clara looked uncomfortable. Adrian sighed. "She has nowhere to stay." In my previous life, those words had destroyed me. He had said them when I discovered Clara sleeping at his office. He had said them when I found hotel receipts. He had said them when she became pregnant. And every time, I had been the foolish wife who accepted another explanation. This time, I simply nodded. "Then she can stay." Adrian stared at me. "What?" I said, "She can stay." Clara looked up. He smiled at her. "There's a guest room upstairs." Adrian's expression changed. "You're not angry?" "Oh, I am." I walked toward the stairs. "But I'm tired of being angry at people who already know exactly what they're doing." That night, I slept in the guest room. I did not cry. I did not confront Adrian. I did not ask why. Instead, I opened the locked drawer beneath my desk. Inside was a notebook. In my previous life, it had belonged to my father. He had been an architect who designed sustainable housing systems. But after his death, everyone assumed his unfinished research was worthless. Everyone except me. I remembered what happened later. Adrian had taken those designs. He had turned my father's research into the foundation of his company. When the company became successful, he told everyone he had created the technology himself. And I had believed him. This time, I would not make the same mistake. I opened the notebook. My fingers stopped on the first page. A sentence was written in my father's handwriting. "If you ever have to choose between protecting someone you love and protecting the truth, protect the truth." I stared at those words for a long time. Then I whispered, "I'm listening, Dad." The next morning, Adrian came into the kitchen expecting breakfast. I had always prepared it. Eggs exactly the way he liked them. Coffee without sugar. Toast cut diagonally. For almost a year, I had built my mornings around him. But that morning, there was only coffee for me. Adrian stood behind my chair. "Where's mine?" I looked up. "Make it yourself." He actually laughed. "You're joking." "No." His smile disappeared. It was the first crack in the life he thought he controlled. And I knew it would not be the last. For the next 2 weeks, I became the quietest person in my own marriage. Adrian expected a fight. Instead, he got silence. He brought Clara into our home, expecting jealousy. I gave her the guest room and stopped asking questions. He came home late. I stopped waiting. He canceled dinner. I ate alone. He forgot our anniversary dinner reservation. I canceled it myself. At first, he seemed relieved, then confused, then suspicious. One evening, he stood in the doorway of my study. "You've changed." I kept reading. "Have I?" "You don't care anymore." I looked at him. "That isn't what I said. You don't ask where I am." "Should I?" "You used to." I closed my book. "I used to believe knowing where you were would make me feel safe. And now I know safety doesn't come from knowing where someone is." His jaw tightened. "You're punishing me." "No." I smiled faintly. "I'm observing you." He hated that answer, because there is nothing more frightening to someone hiding a betrayal than a person who has stopped reacting and started noticing. I began checking our financial accounts. Not obsessively, carefully. In my previous life, Adrian had slowly moved money from our joint savings into accounts connected to his company. Back then, I had never questioned it. This time, I discovered something within 3 days. A payment of $70,000 had been transferred to a consulting firm I had never heard of. The company's director was Clara's older brother. I printed the transaction. I didn't confront Adrian. I simply placed it inside my father's notebook. Then I remembered another detail. 3 months after this payment in my previous life, Adrian had asked me to sign a loan agreement. The loan had been secured against my father's old property. I had signed. This time, that property would never touch his hands. The following Friday, I received a call from my father's former colleague, Professor Samuel Hart. I almost didn't answer. In my previous life, I had met him only once at my father's funeral. But this time, when I heard his voice, my heart tightened. "Lena." "Yes." "Your father left something with me." I froze. "What?" "Research files. He asked me to give them to you when you were ready." "Why didn't you give them to me before?" There was a pause. "Because Adrian came to me after the funeral." My fingers tightened around the phone. "What did he want?" "Your father's research." Everything inside me went cold. Professor Hart continued. "He told me you were not interested in engineering and that he intended to preserve your father's work." I closed my eyes. Even after death, Adrian had been taking things from me. What exactly did my father leave? A prototype design and a patent application. I stopped breathing for a moment. A patent application? Yes. An incomplete one. Is it valuable? It could be. Those 3 words changed everything. That evening, I met Professor Hart at a small cafe across town. He gave me a thick folder. Inside were sketches, calculations, and pages covered in my father's handwriting. It was a modular energy system designed for low-income housing. Affordable, efficient, scalable, and according to Professor Hart, years ahead of its time. Your father believed this could change how small communities access energy, he said. I looked at the drawings. In my previous life, Adrian's company had become famous for something remarkably similar. I had spent years believing he was a genius. He wasn't. He had stolen the beginning of my father's dream, and I had helped finance its completion. I looked up at Professor Hart. "Can I finish it?" He smiled. "That is why your father left it with you." For the first time since waking from my previous life, I felt something stronger than anger. Purpose. I went home that night and found Adrian waiting. "Where were you?" I put my coat on the chair. "Out." "With who?" "Why?" He stared at me. "You've been acting strange." I almost told him. Instead, I walked past him. Behind me, he said, "Lena, we're married." I stopped. For a moment, I remembered the old me. The woman who would have turned around. The woman who would have apologized. The woman who would have begged him to love her again. But she was gone. I looked over my shoulder. "I know." Then I walked upstairs. Behind the closed door, I placed my father's drawings on the desk. I picked up a pencil. And for the first time, I began building a future that did not include my husband. The first thing I learned after deciding to leave Adrian was that walking away was much harder than deciding to walk away. I had imagined freedom would feel dramatic. It didn't. It felt like sitting alone at my desk at 2 in the morning, staring at my father's equations while the rest of the house slept. It felt like fear, real fear, because I had spent years making Adrian the center of every decision. Where we lived, what we spent, whose dreams mattered, what sacrifices were necessary. Now I had to ask myself a question I had avoided for years. What did I actually want? The answer slowly emerged from the papers in front of me. I wanted to finish my father's work. Professor Hart introduced me to a small engineering laboratory near the university. It wasn't impressive. The building was old, the equipment was outdated, and the heating barely worked. But nobody there cared that I was Adrian's wife. They cared whether my calculations were correct. That difference felt strangely liberating. For the next several weeks, I divided my time between the laboratory and home. I told Adrian I was working on a private project. He didn't ask many questions. He was too distracted by Clara. Their relationship had become more obvious. They went to business dinners together. They received phone calls together. They stopped pretending when I entered a room. And somehow I was grateful. Their carelessness made leaving easier. One evening, I came home earlier than expected. I heard voices in the dining room. Clara was speaking. "You promised me this company would be ours." Adrian answered sharply. "It will be. What about Lena?" There was silence. Then Adrian said the sentence that finally killed the last piece of hope I had carried. "She won't fight me." I stood outside the door. Clara laughed softly. "She loves you too much." I know. My hand tightened around the folder I was carrying. In my previous life, that sentence would have broken me. This time, it clarified everything. I entered the room. Both of them froze. Adrian stood immediately. "Lena, don't." My voice wasn't loud, but he stopped. I placed the folder on the table. "I need to discuss something with you." His expression became cautious. "What?" "I want separate finances." He stared at me. "Why?" "Because I think it's healthier." "Healthy?" "Yes." "You suddenly want separate finances after almost a year of marriage?" "I've been thinking about it." Clara quietly left the room. Adrian waited until she disappeared upstairs. Then he lowered his voice. "Is this because of her?" "No." "Then what is it?" I looked at him. "Because I finally realized love doesn't mean giving someone unrestricted access to your life." He laughed bitterly. "You've become paranoid." "Maybe." I picked up the folder. But paranoia is cheaper than regret. That night, I moved my personal savings into a separate account. I also contacted a lawyer. Not because I was ready to divorce. Not yet. I needed evidence first. I needed to understand exactly how much Adrian had already taken. And I needed to protect my father's work. 3 days later, something happened that I had been expecting. Adrian came into my study carrying a document. "I need you to sign this." I looked at the first page. A loan agreement. My heart went still. 7 years ago, this had been the paper that began the collapse of my life. The same amount, the same property, the same company, even the same lawyer's name. I remember my previous life. I had signed it without reading. Adrian had kissed my forehead and said, "Trust me." 6 months later, the property was gone. I looked at the document, then at him. "What is this for?" "Expansion." "Why do you need my property?" "Because the bank wants additional security." "You told me the company was doing well." "It is." "Then why does it need my father's property?" His expression hardened. "Because that's how business works." I slowly pushed the document back toward him. "Find another way." He stared. "Lena." "No." "You don't trust me?" I looked directly into his eyes. "No." The word hung between us. He had expected anger. He had expected tears. He had expected negotiation. He hadn't expected the truth. His face became cold. "You've been talking to someone." "No." "Someone has been filling your head with nonsense." "No one had to." I stood. "I've been paying attention." For the first time, I saw something dangerous flash across his face. Not guilt. Fear. He knew I was no longer easy to control, and that made him reckless. The next morning, I discovered the first real attack. My laboratory access had been revoked. When I called, the administrator told me my project had been removed from the facility's schedule. I was stunned. "What?" "I was instructed to suspend your work." "By whom?" There was an uncomfortable pause. "Your husband." I closed my eyes. Of course. Adrian had always believed that if he couldn't control my decisions, he could control my surroundings. I drove straight to his office. His receptionist looked nervous when she saw me. "Mr. Vale is in a meeting." "I'll wait." 20 minutes later, Adrian emerged. His expression was irritated. "What are you doing here?" You canceled my laboratory access. I made a phone call. You had no right. I have every right to protect my wife from embarrassing herself. I stared at him. Embarrassing myself? You're play engineer now? I felt something inside me go quiet. He continued. You barely understand what you're doing. You should focus on your marriage instead of wasting money on a project that will never succeed. I thought about my father, about his notebook, about the years Adrian had spent taking credit for ideas he didn't create. Then I said, maybe you're right. Adrian looked surprised. I smiled. Maybe I should stop wasting money. He relaxed. He thought he had one. He didn't know I'd already found another laboratory, one my father had helped establish years ago. That afternoon, Professor Hart made a call. By evening, I had a new workspace. It was smaller than the first, but it belonged to people who respected my work. And something else happened there. I met Noah. He was the laboratory's systems engineer. Quiet, observant, not particularly charming. At least, not at first. He looked at my prototype and said, "You got a thermal efficiency problem." I blinked. "Excuse me." He pointed at my calculations. Here. I looked. He was right. I had spent 3 days missing the error. That's annoying. He smiled. That's engineering. I laughed. It was the first genuine laugh I'd had in months. He didn't ask about Adrian. He didn't ask why I was working alone. He didn't tell me I was too ambitious. He simply helped me fix the equation. That was how Noah entered my life. Not with flowers. Not with promises. With a pencil and an inconveniently correct observation. Weeks passed. The prototype improved. The system began working. But success brought a new problem. Money. We needed proper materials. I had some savings, but not enough. I considered selling my jewelry. Then I remembered something my father had once told me. Never sell an asset to fund an idea if the asset can help the idea survive. I searched through his old records. That was when I found a forgotten investment account. My father had purchased shares in a small clean energy supplier before he died. The account had been untouched for years. The value was modest, but it was enough. More importantly, it gave me a connection to a manufacturer willing to produce our prototype. For the first time, I saw a path forward. Then Adrian called. "Come home." "I am home." "No. Come back to the house." "I don't want to." His voice became sharper. "Lena, you're my wife." I closed my eyes. "I know." "Then act like it." I almost laughed. That sentence would once have made me cry. Now it only sounded tired. "I've been acting like your wife for 11 months, I said. "I think it's time I remembered how to act like myself." There was silence. Then he said, "You're making a mistake." "No." I looked at the prototype glowing beneath the laboratory lights. For the first time, I'm making my own decision. I hung up. That night, I stayed in the laboratory until dawn. When the first successful test completed, the entire room went silent. The system had stored energy efficiently enough to power a small apartment for nearly 2 days. Professor Hart stared at the readings. Noah looked at me. "You did it." I shook my head. "We did." But there was something none of us knew yet. The test data would soon attract attention far beyond our little laboratory. And Adrian was about to discover that the wife he thought he could silence was building something that could make her impossible to ignore. The first person outside the laboratory to notice our prototype was not an investor. It was a woman named Miriam Cole, the director of a housing nonprofit that worked with communities where electricity was unreliable. She had come to the laboratory expecting to see a demonstration. Instead, she stayed for nearly 3 hours. When the final test ended, she looked at me. "How much would 1 unit cost?" I gave her the estimate. She frowned. "That is far less than I expected." "That is the point." She walked back to the prototype. "What happens if this is installed in 100 homes?" "We're not ready for 100. 200. I smiled. "We're barely ready for 10. She laughed. "Good. You know your limits." Then she became serious. "If you can prove this works outside the laboratory, I can introduce you to people who can fund it." That conversation changed the direction of my life. For the first time, I wasn't building something to escape Adrian. I was building something because I believed in it. We installed the first prototype in a small community outside the city. The first week was terrifying. The weather was unpredictable. The equipment overheated twice. A connection failed. One night, I sat on the ground beside the equipment box with grease on my hands and tears in my eyes. Noah crouched beside me. You okay? I don't know. You don't have to know. I looked at him. What if it fails? Then we fix it. What if we can't? Then we learn why. I smiled weakly. You make everything sound simple. It isn't simple. He handed me a bottle of water. But panic has never repaired a circuit. I laughed, and somehow I felt better. 3 weeks later, the system survived its first major storm. The community didn't lose power. Miriam called me that night. You've got something. I sat alone in the laboratory, listening to her voice. For years, I had believed my worth depended on whether Adrian chose me. Now a stranger was telling me that something I created had value. It felt different. It felt clean. Meanwhile, my marriage was collapsing without me pushing it. Adrian became increasingly frustrated. He had expected me to return. Instead, I spent more nights at the laboratory. Then one afternoon, I received an email from my lawyer. The financial records I had requested had arrived. I opened them. My hands went cold. There were transfers I hadn't known about. Payments to Clara's brother. Company expenses disguised as consulting fees. Money moved through several accounts. And one transfer stood out. A large amount had been withdrawn from the company shortly before Adrian asked me to secure his expansion loan. I stared at the document. He wasn't trying to expand. He was covering a hole created by money that had already disappeared. I called my lawyer. Can he legally ask me to guarantee this loan? Not without your consent. What happens if I refuse? You protect your property. I exhaled. Then I'm refusing. That evening, Adrian was waiting at home. He had prepared dinner, for the first time in weeks. There were candles on the table. I knew immediately something was wrong. You're home, he said. Yes. I thought we could talk. I sat down. He poured wine. I know things haven't been good. I said nothing. I've made mistakes. Still nothing. He reached across the table. Lena, I don't want to lose you. The words were almost convincing. Almost. Then I remembered the hospital. His back disappearing through the doorway. The debt papers. The empty bank account. The woman he had chosen. I gently moved my hand away. What changed? He looked confused. What? What changed about you? Nothing. Exactly. His face tightened. You think I'm the villain? No. I looked at him calmly. I think you're a man who only notices what something is worth when he's about to lose it. He stood abruptly. You're being unfair. Maybe. I stood too. But I'm no longer willing to gamble my future on whether you're capable of becoming someone else. His voice dropped. Is there someone else? I almost smiled. No. Then why are you leaving? Because I finally understand that staying isn't the same as loving. He stared at me. I had already packed a small suitcase. Not because I was running away. Because I had made a decision. I was moving into a small apartment near the laboratory. When I carried the suitcase downstairs, Adrian followed me. You'll come back. I stopped at the door. He sounded certain. You always do. I looked at him. That was the last thing he said to me that night. I didn't correct him. I simply walked out. My new apartment was tiny. The kitchen had one window. The bedroom was barely large enough for a bed and a desk. The heating made a strange clicking sound every few minutes. And I loved it. For the first time in my adult life, every object in a room belonged there because I had chosen it. There was no expensive furniture selected by Adrian. No photographs arranged to impress his business partners. No dining table where I had spent nights waiting for someone who wasn't coming home. Just a small desk, my father's notebook, and the prototype calculations. I slept better than I had in years. Adrian called constantly. At first, I didn't answer. Then he began sending messages. We need to talk. You can't just leave. This is our home. Come back. I read them. I didn't respond. Eventually, his messages changed. Are you really doing this? Then, Lena, please. Then, I miss you. I stared at that one for a long time. In another life, those words would have brought me home. Now they only made me sad. Not for him, for the woman I had once been. 2 months passed. Our company, which had not yet officially become a company, received its first serious investment offer. A regional development fund wanted to finance production. The condition was simple. They wanted the technology registered properly. That meant filing the patent. Professor Hart helped me prepare the documents. When I signed them, I stared at my name. Not Adrian's. Mine. The patent application was filed under my name and the names of the engineers who had actually worked on the project. For the first time, my father's dream had my signature beneath it. Then the news spread. A local technology magazine published a short article about our project. It wasn't a huge story, but one sentence caught my attention. The project was developed from research originally created by the late engineer Daniel Rowan. My father's name. I read the sentence 3 times. Then I cried. Quietly. Not because I was sad, because someone had finally remembered who had started this. The article reached Adrian. I knew it before he called. He said nothing for several seconds. Then, "You're working with my company's technology." I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. "No, you're using ideas from my business." "No, Adrian." My voice remained calm. "Your business is using ideas from my father." Silence. "You've known." "Yes." "How long?" "Long enough." He breathed heavily. "Lena, we can settle this privately." "There is nothing to settle. You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand exactly what I'm doing. You're trying to destroy me." "No." I looked around my little apartment. "I stopped trying to save you." That was the moment his anger disappeared. Because he finally understood. I wasn't fighting him. I was simply moving on. The next week, his company suffered its first serious setback. A bank refused the expansion loan. Then an investor requested an audit. Then, one of Adrian's partners discovered the unexplained transfers to Clara's brother. Adrian called me again. This time, his voice sounded different. Afraid. "Lena, I need help." I closed my eyes. There it was. The moment I had once imagined countless times. The moment he finally needed me. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. "I can't help you. You don't understand. If this audit continues, everything falls apart. Then tell the truth." It's not that simple. It never is when someone has been lying. He was silent. Then he said, "I can fix everything between us." "No." "Why?" "Because there is nothing between us left to fix." I ended the call. That night, Noah found me sitting outside the laboratory. "You look sad." I thought I'd feel happy. When he finally realized what he'd done. Noah sat beside me. And I looked at the streetlights. "I don't. Maybe that's because you weren't waiting for his regret." I turned toward him. "Then what was I waiting for?" He smiled gently. "For yourself." I didn't answer, but his words stayed with me. A week later, the patent office accepted our preliminary filing, and the development fund signed the first financing agreement. We had money. We had a working prototype. We had a path. What we didn't know was that the success of our project would soon expose a secret far more damaging than Adrian's financial fraud. Because buried in the old company records was evidence that he hadn't merely borrowed my father's research. He had deliberately concealed it. And when that truth surfaced, the people who once believed Adrian was a self-made genius would finally learn who had been standing behind him all along. The truth came out on a Tuesday morning. I was in the laboratory when Professor Hart walked in carrying a cardboard archive box. He looked older than usual. "Lena," he said, "we found something." I put down my tablet. "What?" He placed the box on the table. "These were stored in your father's old university office." I opened it. Inside were letters, technical reports, and copies of correspondence from years before my father's death. I recognized Adrian's name almost immediately. My stomach tightened. "Why is he here?" Professor Hart looked at me. "Because your father knew him." I stared at the papers. Apparently, Adrian had approached my father years earlier, when he was still a junior consultant with almost no reputation. He had asked for advice. My father had helped him. More than once. He had reviewed his business plans, introduced him to investors, even allowed him to study the early version of the energy system. But there was something else. A letter dated 2 months before my father's death. My father's handwriting filled the page. "Adrian has requested exclusive rights to commercialize the research." I refused. The work belongs to the foundation and must remain accessible to the communities it was designed to help. I read it twice. Then I found another letter. This one was from Adrian. "If you will not cooperate, I will find another way." My hands began to shake. Professor Hart quietly said, "Your father was going to report him." "Why?" He discovered Adrian had already presented parts of the research to private investors as his own. I closed my eyes. Everything clicked. The first time Adrian had entered my life, he had already known what my father's work was worth. He hadn't simply fallen in love with me. He had seen an opportunity, and somehow I had spent years defending him. I turned another page. There was an agreement. Adrian had signed a confidentiality document. He had broken it, and after my father's death, he had continued using the research. The most painful part wasn't discovering what Adrian had done. It was realizing how carefully he had made me believe the opposite. He had always said my father's work was unfinished. He had always said my father had been brilliant, but impractical. He had always told me that he was the one who understood how to turn those ideas into something real. I had believed him. Professor Hart watched me. What are you going to do? I looked at the documents. I don't know. For the first time, revenge tempted me. Not the childish kind. The kind where you want the world to know exactly what someone did. I wanted to expose him. I wanted to take back every piece of credit he had stolen. But then I remembered my father's words. Protect the truth, not your anger. So I took the documents to my lawyer. We filed everything properly. No threats. No public accusations. No dramatic confrontation. Just evidence. Meanwhile, our project continued growing. The first 10 systems became 50, then 200. Our company finally had a name. Rowan Energy Systems. I almost rejected it. It felt too personal. But Professor Hart insisted. Your father gave you the foundation, he said. You gave it a future. So I agreed. The company grew faster than I expected. And with growth came attention. News outlets wanted interviews. Investors wanted meetings. People began calling me an entrepreneur. The word felt strange. I still remembered the woman who used to wait at a dining table for Adrian. Now people were waiting for me. One evening, Noah and I stood on the roof of our new office. He handed me 2 cups of coffee. You're famous. I laughed. No, your face is on the business magazine downstairs. That doesn't make me famous. It makes you difficult to hide. I looked at him. He was smiling. Then he became serious. You've changed. How? You used to apologize before saying what you wanted. I thought about it. He was right. I had spent most of my marriage apologizing for having needs. Now I simply stated them. I think I'm finally comfortable disappointing people. Noah nodded. That's a useful skill. We stood there quietly. Then he said, Lena, when this is all over, what do you want? I looked at the city. I don't know. That's okay. He didn't push. That was one of the things I appreciated most about him. He never tried to fill silence just because it existed. He let me have space. Months later, I received an invitation. A national sustainability conference wanted me to give the opening presentation. The night before the event, I received another message. From Adrian. I will be there. I stared at it. I didn't know why he was telling me. Then another message arrived. We need to talk. I deleted both. The next morning, I walked onto the stage. Hundreds of people were watching. For a second, I remembered the old me. The woman who had stood behind Adrian at business events, smiling while he took credit for everything. Then I looked at the screen behind me. My father's name appeared. And beneath it, Lena Rowan, founder and chief engineer. My hand stopped shaking. I began to speak. I didn't talk about Adrian. I didn't talk about betrayal. I didn't talk about my marriage. I talked about my father. I talked about communities that had to choose between heating their homes and paying their bills. I talked about engineering that served people instead of impressing investors. And I talked about one idea that had survived even after the person who created it was gone. When I finished, the audience stood. I didn't notice Adrian until I stepped backstage. He was standing near the entrance. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He looked different, not physically, but something in his posture had changed. The confidence was gone. He looked at the company representatives surrounding me, at Professor Hart, at Noah, at the journalists waiting for interviews. Then he looked at me. You really did it. I nodded. Yes. He swallowed. I didn't think you could. I know. His expression tightened. I was wrong. Yes. That seemed to hurt him more than anger would have. He had expected me to say more. Instead, I checked my phone. I have another interview. Lena. I stopped. Please. I looked at him. What do you want? I want 5 minutes. You had years. He flinched. I know. That was the first time I heard genuine regret in his voice. Not frustration. Not fear. Regret. I didn't understand what I had. I said nothing. I thought you'd always be there. You were right. He looked surprised. I was. Yes. You always assumed I'd return. He lowered his head. I did. That was my mistake, too. His eyes lifted. Your mistake. I taught you that I would tolerate anything. He shook his head. No, I did that. We both know what happened. He stepped closer. Can we start over? I looked at him for a long moment. There was a time when those words were everything I wanted. Now, they sounded like an invitation to return to a house that had already burned down. No. His face fell. Is there someone else? No. Then why? I answered quietly. Because I don't want the life we had. He looked toward Noah. Is he the reason? No. Then what is? I took a breath. Peace. He didn't respond. I continued. I don't hate you anymore, Adrian. I don't even want revenge. His eyes became wet. I just don't belong to you anymore. He looked away. For several seconds, the man I had once loved stood in silence. Then he said, I really did love you. I believed him. That was the saddest part. Maybe he had loved me. Maybe he had simply loved himself more. Goodbye, Adrian. I walked away. But the story didn't end there. 2 weeks later, the audit of Adrian's company became public. The missing funds were traced. The consulting payments were documented. And the old confidentiality agreement with my father became part of a legal dispute over intellectual property. Adrian wasn't dragged away in handcuffs. There was no dramatic courtroom collapse. Reality was quieter. His investors withdrew. His company lost its financing. He was forced to sell assets to repay debts. Clara left. The relationship that had seemed worth destroying our marriage lasted less than a year after I left. I heard she moved to another city. Adrian remained behind, alone, but I never celebrated it, because his suffering did not repair mine. My company kept growing. Then one afternoon, Noah came into my office holding 2 tickets. What are those? Dinner. With who? He looked offended. I'm hoping with you. I smiled. You're asking me out? I've been asking for months. I thought you were being friendly. He sighed. That explains a lot. I laughed. For the first time, romance didn't feel like a rescue. It felt like a choice. I went to dinner with him, and when he reached across the table, he didn't grab my hand. He simply placed his palm beside mine, giving me the choice. I turned my hand over. Our fingers touched. Nothing dramatic happened. No fireworks. No promises about forever. Just warmth. And somehow that was enough. A month later, I received an invitation to return to my hometown. My father's old university wanted to honor him. They also wanted to name a research center after him. I accepted. I didn't know Adrian would be there. But when I saw him standing alone at the back of the hall, older and quieter than before, I understood something. Some endings don't need hatred. Some people simply become part of the road you no longer travel. And as I walked toward the stage beneath my father's name, I realized that the life I had once feared losing had never truly been mine. I had been protecting a marriage, but I had forgotten to protect myself. Now, I finally understood the difference. And the next chapter of my life was about to begin. The awards ceremony ended late, but I stayed behind after everyone left. The university hall was almost empty. My father's name was engraved on the wall behind the stage. Daniel Rowan Center for Community Engineering. I stood there alone, running my fingers over the letters. For years, I had thought losing my father meant losing the part of me that understood him. Now I realized I had been carrying his unfinished dream all along. I heard footsteps behind me. I knew who it was before I turned. Adrian. He stopped several feet away. I won't keep you long. I nodded. He looked at the wall. He would have been proud. Yes. I used to think his work was outdated. You did. I was wrong. Yes. He gave a small, sad smile. You don't make things easy. I used to make everything easy for everyone. His eyes dropped. I know. We stood quietly. Then he said, Clara left. I didn't respond. She took some money and disappeared. Still nothing. I lost the company. I heard. I had to sell the house. That one landed differently. Not because I wanted him to suffer. Because that house had once contained so many memories. Our first Christmas. Our first anniversary. The night we danced in the kitchen because the electricity went out. The morning he promised we would grow old there. For a moment, I could see all of it. But the memories no longer pulled me backward. They were simply memories. Adrian looked at me. Do you ever think about that house? Yes. Do you miss it? I consider the question. I miss who I was when I believed it was home. He looked down. That hurts. I didn't say it to hurt you. I know. He took a breath. I've spent a lot of time trying to understand when I lost you. I almost corrected him. He hadn't lost me. He had repeatedly chosen against me. But I didn't say it. He continued. I think I started losing you long before Clara. I nodded. Yes. When you stopped trusting me? No. When I lied? No. Then when... I looked at him. When you started believing my love was guaranteed. His expression changed. That was the answer he had not expected. I thought because you loved me, you'd forgive anything. You weren't completely wrong. He looked confused. I forgave you many times. Then why didn't you forgive me this time? I did. He stared at me. I forgave you. Then why won't you come back? Because forgiveness isn't an invitation. He closed his eyes. I continued softly. I don't need you to suffer for what you did. I don't need you to apologize forever. I don't even need you to understand everything. Then what do you need? To be free of it. He nodded slowly. I understand. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. Either way, I was done explaining. When I left the hall, Noah was waiting outside. He held up his phone. You disappeared. I was talking to Adrian. He nodded. Do you want to talk about it? No. Okay. We started walking. After a few steps, I looked at him. That's it. What? You're not going to ask? No. I smiled. Why? Because if you want to tell me, you will. I stopped walking. He looked back. What? Nothing. What? I shook my head. You're very different from him. Noah smiled. I hope that's a compliment. It is. He walked back toward me. I don't want to be different from him just to win against him. My smile faded. I want to be the person you choose when there is no comparison. Something inside me softened. That was exactly what I wanted. Not another relationship built from wounds. Not a man who wanted to rescue me. Not someone trying to prove he was better than Adrian. Just someone who saw me as I was. Someone who didn't need me to be broken to feel important. I took his hand. I think I choose you. His fingers tightened around mine. Then I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that. I laughed. Don't make promises you can't guarantee. He smiled. Fair. We kept walking. For the first time, the future didn't feel like something I needed to predict. I could simply live it. But there was one final loose end. The legal dispute over my father's research had not yet ended, and the evidence Adrian had left behind was about to expose someone else who had benefited from his deception. The person was Adrian's former business partner, Marcus Bell. Marcus had known about my father's research. He had helped Adrian present it to investors. For years, he had remained silent because he profited from the company. When the legal investigation began, Marcus tried to distance himself. Then the documents surfaced. Emails, meeting records, copies of presentations, everything. My father had been listed nowhere. Adrian's name appeared everywhere. But the original technical notes were unmistakably my father's. The case was settled quietly. The rights to the stolen material were transferred back to the foundation. Marcus was required to return money gained from licensing technology he had no right to claim. Adrian lost the last remaining shares in his company. None of it made me feel victorious. Instead, I felt relieved. The truth had finally been put where it belonged. Months later, Rowan Energy Systems opened its first community production facility. I stood outside with a hard hat on, watching the first shipment leave. Professor Hart stood beside me. Your father would have hated that helmet. I laughed. He hated all unnecessary safety equipment. He was impossible. He was. I smiled. Then I looked at the trucks. There were 50 systems inside. 50 homes that would have more reliable electricity because of something my father started and I finished. I thought about the woman I had once been. She had believed success meant being loved by the right person. Now I understood. Success was waking up and liking the person in the mirror. That evening, Noah and I went home together. Not to a mansion, not to a house chosen to impress anyone. To a modest home near the edge of the city. There were plants in the windows, books stacked everywhere, 2 mugs beside the sink, and a small framed photograph of my father. Noah walked into the kitchen. Dinner. You cook. I cooked yesterday. And you survived. That isn't a recommendation. He laughed. We made dinner together. Later, We sat outside beneath the stars. Noah looked at me. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't left? I was quiet for a moment. Yes. And I think I would have disappeared. He frowned. Not literally. I know. I looked toward the city. I mean, I would have become someone I didn't recognize. He reached for my hand. You found yourself. I think I finally stopped abandoning myself. He kissed my forehead. I leaned against his shoulder. There was no dramatic declaration. No perfect ending. Just peace. A week later, I received one final letter from Adrian. He had moved away. The letter was short. He didn't ask me to return. He didn't blame Clara. He didn't blame me. He simply wrote that he had spent years believing love was possession. He said he had confused forgiveness with permission. And he said he finally understood why I had left. I folded the letter. I didn't throw it away. I didn't keep it beside my bed either. I placed it in a box with old photographs and wedding invitations. Then I closed the lid. Some things didn't need to be destroyed. They simply needed to be put where they belonged. In the past. That night, I stood beside the window. Noah came behind me. What are you thinking? I smiled. That I used to be terrified of losing my marriage. And now I'm grateful I lost it. He raised an eyebrow. That's harsh. Maybe. I turned toward him. But sometimes the thing you're desperately trying to save is the very thing preventing you from becoming who you're supposed to be. He kissed my forehead. Come to bed, philosopher. I laughed. As I followed him upstairs, I thought about the title of the life I had lived. I had once believed walking away meant giving up. It didn't. Walking away meant accepting that some relationships could not be repaired without destroying yourself. I hadn't left because I stopped loving Adrian. I left because I finally understood what staying would cost us both. It would have turned love into resentment, resentment into cruelty, and eventually, two people who once loved each other would have become strangers who knew exactly where to hurt one another. I refused to let that be our ending. So I walked away, not because I was stronger than him, not because I wanted revenge, not because I had another man waiting. I walked away because I had finally learned that love without respect is not a home. And when I looked around my life years later, I realized the greatest victory wasn't that Adrian regretted losing me. It wasn't that my company succeeded. It wasn't even that my father's name had been restored. The greatest victory was simpler. I no longer needed anyone from my past to tell me that I deserved the future I had built. I already knew, and that was enough. 3 years after I left Adrian, Rowan Energy Systems opened its largest community project yet. It was a housing development on the outskirts of the city. 200 homes, 200 families. Every building was designed around the system my father had once imagined on a stack of unfinished papers. I stood at the entrance that morning while workers moved between the buildings. A little girl ran past me carrying a yellow balloon. Her mother followed. "Thank you," the woman said. I smiled. "You don't have to thank me." She shook her head. "You don't understand. My daughter used to do her homework beside a window because we couldn't keep the lights on all night." I looked at the little girl. She was sitting beneath a lamp inside her new home, drawing something on a piece of paper. Was she drawing? Her new house. I smiled. That moment meant more to me than every award I had received, because success had finally stopped being about proving something. It was about building something useful. That afternoon, the board surprised me with another announcement. They wanted to establish a scholarship in my father's name. I immediately thought of the young woman I had been. 27, married, terrified of disappointing everyone, convinced that being useful meant sacrificing herself. I approved the scholarship, but I added one condition. It would support students who wanted to pursue engineering, design, or science despite lacking financial support. I wanted someone else to have the opportunity one had nearly lost. That evening, I returned home exhausted. Noah was waiting in the kitchen. He had cooked. Again. I looked at the food. "You cooked?" "Yes." "Should I be worried?" He laughed. "Sit down." I did. We ate quietly. After dinner, he placed a small box beside my plate. "What is this?" "Open it." Inside was a key. I looked at him. "To what?" "Our new workshop." I blinked. "You bought a workshop?" "We bought it." He slid a document toward me. It was the deed. The building was ours. Not the company's. Ours. I stared at it. "What are we going to do with it?" "Whatever you want." I laughed. That is a dangerous sentence. I know. Then he reached into his pocket. There was a second box. My heart stopped. Noah. He opened it. A simple ring. No giant stone. No elaborate display. Just a thin band with a tiny engraved line inside. I read the words. Choose yourself. Then choose me. My eyes filled with tears. I thought you hated promises. I hate promises people make because they're afraid. He took my hand. This one is different. Ow! Because I'm not asking you to become someone else for me. He looked into my eyes. I love who you already are. I laughed through my tears. You practiced that. A little. I kissed him. For years, I had thought a happy ending meant finding someone who would never hurt me. Now I understood that no human being could make that promise. A mature love was different. It wasn't the absence of fear. It was the presence of trust. The next morning, I wore the ring to work. Nobody asked me about it. Professor Hart noticed. He simply smiled. I wonder when you two would stop pretending you were just business partners. I laughed. By evening, the news had spread. My employees celebrated. My father would never have imagined the life his unfinished research would create. Neither would I. But there was still one final thing I wanted to do. I went back to the old house, the one Adrian had sold years earlier. The new owners had renovated it completely. I stood outside for a few minutes. I expected sadness. Instead, I felt almost nothing. The house looked beautiful, but no longer felt like mine. I realized then that I had finally let go, not of the memories, of the claim that those memories belonged to my future. I turned around and walked away. Years later, people sometimes ask me how I knew when it was time to leave. They expected a dramatic answer, a betrayal, a final argument, a discovery that changed everything. But the truth was quieter. I knew when staying began to cost me the person I was becoming. The first betrayal hurt. The second made me suspicious. The third made me stop fighting. But leaving wasn't one single moment. It was thousands of tiny decisions. The morning I stopped making Adrian's breakfast. The night I stopped waiting for him. The day I opened my own bank account. The moment I refused to sign away my father's property. The first time I walked into a laboratory without introducing myself as someone's wife. The first time someone asked me what I wanted, and I actually knew the answer. Those moments built my escape. Not revenge. Not anger. Choice. Adrian and I never became friends. Some wounds don't need friendship to prove they've healed. But years after our divorce, I received one final message from him. He had started working for a small construction company in another city. Nothing glamorous. Nothing like the empire he once wanted. He wrote, I used to think losing you was the worst thing that ever happened to me. Then another line. Now I think losing you was the first thing that forced me to see what I had become. I read it once. Then I put my phone down. I didn't answer. Not because I hated him. Because there was nothing left to say. Noah was sitting across the room, helping our daughter with a science project. Our daughter. That word still amazed me sometimes. She had my father's curiosity, Noah's patience, and absolutely none of Adrian's ability to make me doubt myself. She ran toward me holding a small model. Mom, look. He coaches beside her. What is it? A house that makes its own electricity. I laughed. Who taught you that? You did. She hugged me. I held her tightly. For a moment, I remembered the hospital from the life I had once lived. The rain, the loneliness, the feeling that everything was over. If that woman could see me now, I wondered what she would say. Maybe she would cry. Maybe she would ask whether leaving had been worth it. I would tell her yes. Not because life became perfect. It didn't. I still failed. I still made mistakes. I still had difficult days. But those problems belonged to me. My life belonged to me. That was the difference. Later that night, after our daughter fell asleep, Noah and I sat together on the balcony. He looked at me. You're quiet. I was thinking about the past. Do you regret anything? I considered the question. I regret how long I waited. You took my hand. But you left. Yes. And you rebuilt. Yes. He smiled. Then maybe that's enough. I leaned against him. It is. The city lights stretched across the horizon. Somewhere beyond them, people were living in homes powered by the technology my father had dreamed about. Somewhere else, Adrian was living a life that no longer had anything to do with mine. And I was finally at peace with that. For a long time, I believed the greatest revenge was becoming successful enough for the people who hurt me to regret losing me. I was wrong. The greatest revenge was becoming so whole that their regret stopped mattering. I didn't need Adrian to admit I had been valuable. I didn't need Clara to apologize. I didn't need anyone to tell me I had made the right choice. I knew. I had walked away from a marriage because I had already seen how it would destroy us both. I had seen the lies, the resentment, the betrayal, the slow death of everything we once promised each other. So I left before we became people we could never forgive. And perhaps that was the strangest mercy of all. I didn't walk away to punish him. I walked away to save myself. And in the end, perhaps I saved him too. Because sometimes the most loving thing two people can do for each other is stop pretending they still belong together. I closed my eyes. Noah squeezed my hand. Inside the house, our daughter laughed in her sleep. I smiled. This was my life. Not the life I had planned. Not the life I had once begged someone else to give me. A better one. A life I had built with my own hands. And for the first time, I didn't look backward. I simply looked ahead. Then I whispered the words I had spent years trying to understand. I don't hate you anymore. I just don't belong to you anymore. And this time, when I said them, there was no sadness in my voice. Only peace.